There are certain principles of the spiritual path that are so simple that sometimes it's hard for us to appreciate how powerful those ideas really are. And one of them is, you don't have to have a sophisticated philosophy to understand, because all of us can experience it, which is that our lives seem to happen on two levels of reality at all times. One is the conditions of the life that we're living. We go to work, we have families, we are of a certain age, we have all these experiences. And the other is the inner state of consciousness we're in while we're experiencing those things. If you've ever been with someone who has an inclination to be sad or to be depressed, they just will stay sad and depressed no matter what's happening. You can both go together to a beautiful movie or to a wonderful park or to a lovely party. If a person is determined to be sad and depressed, absolutely nothing will persuade them that they shouldn't be. And if you're in a happy and a good mood, you have a wonderful time almost no matter what's going on around you. I mean, everyone on one level or another can say that. Also, we'll have certain days in which nothing is particularly going right, but still we feel very cheerful. And we can have days when everything goes wrong, and still we feel very cheerful. And if we think about this really deeply and with enough determination, we will realize that at all times, all we are ever experiencing is the attitude we have and the inner world that we're living in, and how we are allowing or not allowing external circumstances to define that. I mean, this goes all the way to the level of the saints and the masters who, in the midst, if they're tested in that way, which some are, in the midst of very difficult circumstances, do not experience those circumstances as difficult. There was a great Christian saint named St. John of the Cross, and he was persecuted by his own people for all the complex reasons that these things happen. He's thrown into prison, he's mistreated in every possible way, and yet the only experience he has in the midst of that is his own inner experience of God's blessing. And so that which looks horrible to everyone else is not even for him a difficulty. There's another very powerful man named Richard Wurmbrand, and he was a Christian in Romania under the communists. And the communists at that time imprisoned those who stood up and spoke in favor of Christ because it was atheistic. They were trying to destroy that. He wrote a very powerful book with the frightening title called Tortured for Christ. But he talked about being oppressed by these people who hated him for no reason. And he talks about the process that he would constantly go through. Could this be happening outside the will of God? Could these people, even in their evilness, be acting outside the will of God? Whatever reason there is for this to be coming to me, it must be coming to me as a gift from God, ultimately for my own good. And as such, he described it, instead of resisting it, he just embraced it. And he literally tells a story of being forced for hours and hours to pace around the small cell that he was in. And when he started, he was conscious of being forced to do it. So the guards were pushing him one direction, he with his own heart was pulling the other direction. But the more he was forced to do this, the more he began to seek a solution within himself, because all power to influence a situation was completely taken away from him. Now, this is a fairly gruesome example that none of you are facing, but sometimes the principle is proved in the extreme. He had no power whatsoever to influence his situation. He was as helpless as a man can be. He could have, inspired them to beat him to death, but that was about the only choice he had. But he kept saying, why, if Jesus is always with me and Jesus always loves me, how could this be happening other than for some reason this is Jesus wants me to do this? And so he began to saying to himself, if Jesus wants me to do this, why would I not say yes to that? And so instead of thinking about all the circumstances that were against him, he thought only about his relationship with God. And then he describes how, far from it being the suffering that his cruel guards were trying to inflict on him, the more he walked, the more joyful he became. Now, God willing, none of us will ever be tested in such an extreme way. God willing, our promise will be a grumpy boss and a difficult commute, not actually being imprisoned with no freedom whatsoever. But nonetheless, if we can even imagine, by the example of the great saints and him, Richard Wurmbrand is really an extraordinary person to read, that it is possible to live entirely independent, that our inner world and our external world do not have to be dependent on each other, then all of a sudden the whole project of life becomes very different. Now, that doesn't mean, and please don't misunderstand me, that we then become passive in our circumstances. Far from it. But the greatest obstacle always to influencing our circumstances is our own inner climate, isn't it? That we become frightened, we become angry, we become hurt, we become confused, and all of that chaos inside then makes it very difficult to choose a line of action and to follow it. So the first premise is just this beginning idea. Yogananda put it in very simple words. He said, again, these are very challenging concepts. I want you to understand at the beginning of these 2 hours. What I am offering you is not something that you can just snap your fingers and make things different. Okay, this is a way to lay a foundation that can totally transform the way you relate to life, but a pearl of that price does not come just for saying, oh yeah, I think I want it. We have to begin to really, every day, every minute, to really be honest with ourselves, see where our energy is going and where we want to take it. Do I like this? Is this working for me? This, some of you were here earlier. It's not just a question of wanting the suffering to stop. We have to also understand and then implement the shift. Paramahansa Yogananda says, Master says, conditions are always neutral. Whether we experience them as happy or sad depends on the predisposition of the mind. If we're inclined to see them as sad, they're sad. If we're inclined to see them as happy, they are happy. And he said also, if you resolve to be happy, no one on earth can make you unhappy again. If you resolve to be unhappy, no one can ever make you happy. I remember in my life, I've had to discipline myself to become stronger than I was when I was in my earlier years. I tended to be more emotional, more reactive, more dramatic. And I remember a very important turning point in my life when something upset me. And like many women, I used to express my emotions in tears. A good cry is what women will say. And I used to have many a good cry. And something upset me, and I don't remember what it was. And so I stretched out on my bed, and I was going to just dissolve into tears for a while. And I was literally lying on my back, and the tears were beginning to come out of my eyes. And I thought to myself, you're not going to lie here and cry forever. Eventually, you're going to have to get up, and you're going to have to go back, and nothing that you're upset about will have changed merely because you've been lying on the bed crying about it. Secondly, I thought crying is very exhausting. just a big emotional outburst just wears you out completely. So when I finally get up off of this bed and have to go deal with exactly what I'm upset about, I'm just going to be exhausted, and it's going to be all the harder. And I just thought to myself, why don't you just skip the middle part? So I just got right up and just went back and dealt with whatever it was that I had to deal with. And I was so proud of myself, I can't tell you. Just this realization on a very, very deep level that we can spin inside our own heads as long as we want to. But the mere fact of our having a temper tantrum about the life that we're living does not in itself work out the karma that we have to face. A friend of mine, her little son, he was very strong-willed when he was small, and he was given to temper tantrums. And there was nothing she could do about it, so she sort of had gotten a pattern with him. When he started having a temper tantrum, she would put him in his room, and she would latch the door from the outside, and he would know that he could have his tantrum, but he was going to have to be in his room by himself having it. So he was in there having his tantrum, and then it got quiet. So she opened the door, and she says, "Darling, are you done?" And he looks up at his mother and he says, "Not quite, Mommy." So she shut the door and latched it again, and then he sort of screamed and made noise for a while. Then he was finished. Now, we imagine that Divine Mother, we don't understand the extent to which God and Guru are really raising us to be powerful adults. Merely because we have grown up in our bodies, we're not really grown-ups until we become saints. Having lived so much of my life next to Swami Kriyananda, or often next to Swami Kriyananda, he was a grown-up. He was a grown man. He had true maturity. The rest of us were just kids by comparison. Really didn't matter how old we were, 50, 60 years old. We were still children next to him. I think I was sharing with some of you, I was actually buying tickets for an amusement, a boat ride we were taking, and when the man said to me, "How many adults, how many children?" I said, "1 adult," meaning Swami, but realized when the rest of us showed up, we would not be perceived as children. We would have to pay full fare. So I felt like I was lying. I said, "Well, 6 adults," From their purposes, that was true, but not really. Now, we have to understand, many of you are parents. I've never raised children myself, but all my friends have, and I understand raising children from many lifetimes of being a mother. Any of you who have raised children, you know that there's always this dynamic going on, isn't there, between what your child absolutely thinks and believes is in his or her best interests and what you yourself know to be in the child's best interests. And the challenge for the parent is to behave appropriately, and this is a very important part of it, in a way that will work. So it's not just a question of you as the parent having the satisfaction of laying down the law, but it's also so that your son or daughter actually understands the lesson for himself. Even right now I received a letter from a friend, and she's basically yelled herself hoarse trying to make her teenage son be different than he is. Okay? It's not working. But no, the determination is still there. Well, Divine Mother, however you want to think of it, or Master, God himself, whatever words work for you. I like the image of Divine Mother, especially when I'm thinking of us as her children. She has this absolute commitment that we are, in fact, going to become grown-ups. And grown-ups means saints. And that all those little habits that we think don't really matter, just like our children don't think they really matter, she's going to systematically work through every single one of them. She has literally all the time in the world. She has eternity for us to get it right. With our children, it's one lifetime, one body. Maybe you will reincarnate with that same child as your child But when you're raising that child, it's really, you have one shot at it. They're going to be 4, 6, 7, 14, and then they're on their own. But Divine Mother, she sees us again and again and again. And we're still children, whatever incarnation it is, until we're divinely realized. So the first thing to really grasp what we're talking about today is to realize that our life is not random. It's not just happening for no reason. And that there is a divine loving power that is overseeing this whole reality for us. Now, my merely saying that to you cannot persuade you of that. But it's a very important part of right living to do everything you can to persuade yourself of the fact that you are not alone in this world and that there is a loving force that is always looking out for you. Now, just as little children don't always know that Mommy and Daddy are really helping them, but Mommy and Daddy always are. How often do little children say, I want to have the whole chocolate cake for breakfast? And Mommy says, dear, that won't be good. You won't grow up strong if you eat the whole chocolate cake for breakfast. The child has a perfect answer. The child says, yes, I will, right? Based on absolutely nothing except the fact that they want it and they want it now. Now, we say to Divine Mother, I want this job, I want this relationship, I want people to treat me like this, I want this money. And Divine Mother says, dear, if I give you that, then you really won't grow up strong. And we say, yes, I will. And then we pray for it, and we ask our friends to pray for it, and we cry in front of our altar, and we put out all this energy. But when your child has a tantrum and wants you to give in and do something you know is not right, if you really love that child, will you give in? You can't. Now, why would you imagine that God would ruin your life? You're not even willing to ruin the life of your little child, and you think God is going to ruin your life by letting our limited picture of our own potential rule. Now, I'm saying again, because it has to be said, there is an element of faith here. And there's many ways for us to develop that kind of faith, not the least of which is to be wide awake and pay attention to your own life. Just be honest enough to notice. Or if you can't watch your own life, watch the life of people around you. I am a great people watcher, and I always have been. One of the great advantages of Sangha, of satsang, is that your own life is not the only life you can see. You can watch other people, and I don't mean this like a scientist watching bugs in a jar. I mean, we watch as friends. Are there people in here who should be upstairs? Is that what's happening? Aha. Is there anyone else who's trying to take Meditation 1 class? If you are, you're in the wrong place. Okay? I don't mean like watching bugs in a jar, which is to say, without compassion, but to just really understand if certain actions and certain attitudes, what's the fruit of them. I'm in a very privileged position because I came to Ananda Village, to our community, in 1971, and I've had the same friends, many of the same friends, for 30 or 40 years now. And I've watched those attitudes that bring positive results and those attitudes that don't. Now I'm going to go to another place with this. In 1986, in November, for the first time, my husband David and I and another couple, Durga and Vidura, whom some of you know because they lived here and they lived in Gurgaon for a while, we started a program of pilgrimage tours from America to India. And they were based on Autobiography of a Yogi. It's the same that Daya and Keshav are doing now, although we did it a little different because we came from so far away. And we brought 30, usually 30 people, sometimes 50, mostly Americans, almost entirely Americans, mostly people who had never been to India. Rarely had anyone ever been here before. Mostly they had never traveled out of the highly developed Americas or Europe. So when you come to India, especially those years, since then, of course, India has just becoming a whole other country, you saw many things that you didn't see if you'd only ever lived in America. You saw poverty, you saw a simplicity of living, sometimes you saw physical ailments. There were just many things. And many people from America, when they would think of coming to India, this would be a source of concern to them, how they would handle seeing what they would think of as people suffering. And over the course of 20 years, we came to India maybe 12 or 13 times exactly on that basis. And so I took a lot of people through that emotional process of the first year we were here, we were in the city of Calcutta, and we were in the Oberoi Hotel, beautiful hotel, and you could stand in your beautiful room and you could look down on the sidewalk, and we were there for several days, and you could watch the life of the people who lived feet away from you, but their lives were on the sidewalk. So it was a real picture of reality for many. Many people just sailed right into it. And I don't mean they lacked compassion, but they were just able to relate to the reality around them without any hesitation. This is what is happening, and we'll just be with it. Others were always anxious, and especially anxious at what they perceived to be any deprived person. And I gradually began to understand something extremely interesting, that the ability to perceive challenging karma, which is what I would call it, in someone else's life, was exactly equal to the ability to receive and accept challenging karma in one's own life. And those people who were in a state, and this is what I would call it, of having a tantrum about the difficulties that Divine Mother imposed on them, also had a tantrum about the difficulties Divine Mother imposed on others. And the observation that we need to make, and this is where I was saying we have to be very alert and very honest about our own lives. How many times have we learned things that we would never have learned in any other way if it hadn't been difficult circumstances? I was saying earlier today, Master used to argue, he said, with Divine Mother, why do you teach your children through suffering? But he himself couldn't help but notice that people learn when they suffer because they are motivated to change. Now, everyone in the world has a desire to reduce the suffering that they experience. And here we come back to where I started. The one thing we always have control over is what the vibration is inside our own head. Now, whether or not difficult circumstances come is not always within our control or our immediate control, because we have karmic patterns that we have set in motion. We made other decisions, we made other actions that we are now reaping what we sowed. Swami Kriyananda, I quoted this morning, said, we suffer in exactly the same way that we have imposed suffering on others. In classes I gave earlier this week on 2 different nights, I had 2 different questions, but the 2 people were answering themselves. One man was asking about people who are born into very hard circumstances. Why does that happen? What does that mean? The other man asked, what about corrupt, greedy, evil people who don't get punished? Well, they do get punished. It all plays itself out. Now, it just means that there is, and we come back to this, there is a divine, loving mother who really wants us to grow up. If your child does something and you have to deprive him of something he wants, he may feel like he's being utterly mistreated. But if you raise a child without any understanding that wrong actions have consequences, you're not doing him any favor. So just look around you or think about your own life. When people do a wrong action, are we just going to try to hunker down and hope we can get away with it? Or do we really want to know what works, what doesn't work? The fact of spiritual law and karmic consequences is not a matter of religion. It's not a matter of dogma. It's not a matter of philosophy. It's a matter simply of how we are made. You know, we are loving creatures. We respond to love. We need one another. If one is cruel to others, tries to control others' behavior, makes everybody angry and not wanting to be with you, if we abdicate our responsibilities, all of these things, these actions have consequences. The worst consequence is the shrinking of our own heart, the narrowing of our own focus. We are made in the image of God. We are meant to be like Divine Mother herself. And even though we think, if I just take care of myself and don't worry about anyone else, it doesn't work. Our own experience gradually teaches us. And one of the ways we learn is because our own experience teaches us. Isn't that so? So Divine Mother gives it back to us. So the first premise is to realize, and I'll come back and I wanted to touch this for a moment again, about building that kind of faith. This is what I was going to say. That we begin to pay attention to, even if we didn't like it when it happened, even if we wished it had gone differently, what have we learned? What have we been able to learn? What would we never have learned if it didn't happen that way? Now, if we're eager to learn, just think about it like this. So much of suffering in our lives is not really the conditions we're under, but the fact that we resent them, we want it to be different, we feel like a victim, we feel helpless in the face of it. If we simply say, wow, this is really interesting. I was in a circumstance once where I was accused of a wrong action. And I was completely innocent as it happened. I really didn't do it. But everybody around me seemed quite convinced that I had. So part of me wanted to explain to them that I was wrongly accused. But another part of me thought, I didn't actually do this, but I could have. In other words, if circumstances had been different and I'd really had the chance, it's quite likely that I would have done just exactly this. So instead of trying to get the facts right, I just relaxed and thought, I probably got away with it in some other incarnation, because I can feel it's in me. So instead of trying to escape it, let me just rise to meet it. In another circumstance, my husband David and I went to Italy to visit Swami Kriyananda, and he scolded us very strongly on the basis of a report he'd gotten from some other people in our community. Report had come to him of something that we had done, which Swamiji thought was not good, and so he scolded us. So we just accepted the scolding. His scoldings were always very loving. He was very kind. And we just accepted it. A few days later, when there was no defensiveness in me, I just said, "Sir, all of those facts were wrong." And he said, "Oh, I know." Just like that. But then he was very interesting. He said, "But if anybody could even accuse you of that, you have something to learn." I thought, well, that was very subtle on his part, because in fact, the facts were wrong, but we might have done it. If we'd really had the chance, we might have. Or nonetheless, if that vibration was there, then we still had something to learn. We had to correct ourselves. Now, when I'm working with Swami Kriyananda, I know the righteousness of his point of view. Sometimes the people around you who are accusing you are really actively and totally trying to hurt you. They don't have your best interest at heart at all. So let me give you another perspective. When I got married to my husband, I had lived already many years on the spiritual path. And I thought I had a certain equanimity inside myself, a certain freedom from being too much affected by things that went on around me. All I can say to that is, ha. Being a young married, I wasn't that young, but being a married woman, a newly married woman, I was extremely susceptible to the moods and attitudes of my husband. And women have this ability to create problems just all by themselves. They don't necessarily need any input from anyone. I can say that as a woman to other women. Men, you all understand it. I listened to my husband once counseling this man who was having a great difficulty with his wife. He gave this, I was eavesdropping by accident. I sort of got trapped, so I had to listen. This man described this whole complicated situation, after which my husband said, "That's women." Just like that. He had nothing else to say. That's it. That's what you get. So I was doing that very feminine thing. It was just, my poor husband was going about his life, and I was gradually getting more and more upset with him until we had one of those little tiffs that you have, and the whole thing sorted itself out. I, being fairly self-aware, I pretty quickly figured out that he had no part of it, that I was just playing it out. But I really got my feelings hurt. It's the tender heart. It was really, wow. So I started thinking about this. He hadn't even done anything. What if he actually did something? What was going to happen to me then? And so I had this thought, which is a natural thought. I'll just harden my heart a little bit. At that time, we had this outdoor furniture, and it was being painted with this clear polyurethane, is what it was called. So it was clear. You couldn't even see it, but you put these layers over the wood, and so it was tough. Nothing could get through to the wood. So I just thought, I'll just do that. I'll just harden myself a little bit against him, against life, because I don't want to be so tender. But then I thought, this is just the beginning of the marriage. If I start now, because once you start hardening like that, it's indiscriminate. It's not merely that bad things are walled out, but good things are also walled out. And the other side of it is you get trapped on the other side of it yourself, because you're not willing to risk or to open. Now, this is how people cope. This is how most people cope. But this is not what it is to be a saint. This is not what it is to be a real grown-up and to be free. So I really had to think this through. So I started by persuading myself that my husband David, who is a very noble man, is a very noble man. And that therefore, I don't have any reason to fear, because he will always behave correctly. And that was a good, there was a lot of truth in that. That wasn't pure folly. But I thought to myself, who knows what kind of karma may come? Who knows? I mean, something quite outside his control could happen. A friend of mine, her husband became paralyzed in an automobile accident, and she had to take care of him for many years. I mean, the whole dynamic could shift just in an instant like that. Nobody can promise. So first I thought, well, I feel safe with him. I can trust him. Isn't this how we do it? We try to make other people responsible for how I'm going to feel. And even if they're good people, my security is because of how you behave, or even how God behaves, right? God will never do this to me. But then sometimes he does. So what I finally came to understand is I didn't want to close off from this very close relationship and close friend. That did not seem like the way to go. But I couldn't trust him because that wasn't fair to him. Do you understand? It wasn't fair to make him responsible for me being okay. That's not love, that's pure selfishness. I'm going to line up all the people my son is going to be successful, my daughter's going to be beautiful and kind, everybody in my world is going to behave just right, and then I'm okay. Divine Mother laughs at us, basically. We've all seen it. But what I realized is that I could trust that Divine Mother, that my guru, was always looking out for me. And if he sent me a challenge that I didn't want, he would also help me to meet it. And that the only way to move through both human and divine life is with the understanding that God is behind it all. And to look through every circumstance, whether beautiful or whether challenging, and realize that it's Divine Mother taking care of it behind that. Just like how many times for your children have you organized their lives? They don't have any idea that you've organized it for them. They just think that things are happening. They don't know how much work and effort went into making it work for them, but then it works for them, and they get the school that they need, and they get the opportunities that they need, and you're orchestrating it behind them, and they respond appropriately and grow through it. So Divine Mother is with us. And why would she make it effortless for us? How would that make us strong? So I took that, what many people would be as a reason to close down, and decided to make it a reason to be even more open. Now, by no means am I telling you that I've been 100% successful. But this is the choice we have every time something happens. Do I look at the circumstances and decide it's a reason for me to contract? Or do I look at the circumstances and decide it's a reason for me to expand? The whole of spiritual life, the whole of success in life in every level can be defined by those two ideas. Do I contract in the face of this, or do I expand to embrace an even greater reality? The people who expand are those, you see them. The older they get, the bigger they get. No matter how many challenges they face, they always have a new and a positive attitude, contracting or expanding. Now, believing as we do spiritually, that self-realization is infinite consciousness. Divine Mother is raising us to be infinite. So if anything can cause us to shrink away from our full potential, like a very good mother, she's just going to keep pressing on that, isn't she? Instead of our saying, I don't have to learn to read, I don't have to go to school, I don't have to learn to clean up my room, I don't have to learn to control my temper. Divine Mother says, I'm sorry, dear, but you do. I don't have to have this much faith. She says, I'm sorry, but you do. And so then she keeps adding opportunities for us to trust on a deeper level, not that life is always going to come out right, but that if we expand our consciousness and open our hearts in the face of it, we will always find on the other side what it is that we are really seeking. No. Swami Kriyananda in his life had so many trials and troubles, and he had lots of, you think that spiritual people will just have these happy, harmonious lives. It was explained to me this way. It's like the planet there's this equilibrium between light and dark on the planet at this time that just always has to be maintained. So wherever there's a strong light force, it seems like the darkness kind of crowds in and always tries to kind of keep the balance. So no matter how hard we try, we're never ever going to get it completely organized on this level. Maybe it'll last for a little bit of time. Things were going really well in my life at one point. I mean, mostly it goes really well, but it was a particularly positive time. And I remember saying to David, just sort of quietly, this is a very good period of my life, and I know that it won't always be. So there we are. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it, but I was aware of the fact that the waves on the ocean, they rise and they fall. And then, inevitably, things got really tough. David, this is a really terrible period of my life, but it won't always be. And so one of the ways that we build our faith is we pay attention. And when things are going well, we don't sort of stupidly pretend they're not, or always think about the bad things that are going to happen. When God gifts you with great good fortune, it would be rude not to take it. But what we always have to understand is it's not this good thing that's happened, it's the Divine Mother is loving me in this way. And right now she's loving me by letting everything just flow beautifully. Isn't this fun? But if we're always loving Divine Mother on the other side of it, and trusting Divine Mother on the other side of it, then when she takes it away, we say, wow, she's really testing me now. And we can say honestly, this is not nearly as much fun as the other one was. There's an example from the life of Christ, which is, of course, a very dynamic and dramatic life. And he was facing the crucifixion, which is just about as bad as it gets. The life of Jesus, he took on everything that everybody fears. Pain, humiliation, torture, death, everything. Couldn't have been worse. It was a very gross era, and the example had to be unmistakable. And he grieved for his fate. But he didn't grieve for his fate because he was trying to protect his own body. He was an avatar. He was in all bodies. He had completely transcended all physical reality. So the life, death, or suffering of that one body was about as dominant in his consciousness as a speck of dust would be in this room. There could be a speck of dust in this room, and it would be there. But in proportion to the rest of the room, it would not dominate our consciousness. For us, the personalities that we have, the bodies that we're identified with, the karmic patterns and desires that are pushing us, dominate our awareness. This is the incarnation we're in. We don't really remember the ones in the past. We can't see the ones to come. So our awareness is dominated by this experience. But we should really understand that doesn't make this experience as large or defining. That's the main point. It doesn't define us to the extent that we believe that it does. And one of the ways that we cope with whatever it is simply to stand back just a little bit from it. We're still completely engaged. It's more like and here's the word, we expand so that we're remembering that it will not always be like this. It hasn't always been like this, and it will not always be like this. And there is a power of spirit beyond it that is really moving me. But nonetheless, I have to deal with this. So in the life of Christ, his consciousness was literally infinite, but he had incarnated in that body in order to carry out a particular duty for God and Guru, just as we have. I mean, we don't think of ourselves as being as important as he, and in the great scheme of history, we are not. But Master was very definite in saying that God loves every one of his children exactly the same. That God does not love Jesus or Krishna or Lord Rama or any of them more than he loves you or me. His energy flows out, the divine energy, the infinite bliss flows out equally. It's we who limit how much of it we receive. So Jesus, on the eve of his crucifixion, was praying. And he was distressed not because of the death or suffering of his body, which appeared to him like a speck in this room, but because he had come with this divine liberating message And people's ignorance was closing, they were closing their hearts against him. Because it was the very people he came to uplift who in the end were the ones who had him crucified. His own people crucified him. It's always other spiritual people that persecute spiritual people because worldly people don't care. It's always a fight between the spiritual ones, odd as that may seem, it is. So his grief was because they were not opening their hearts to the liberating message he had. So he prayed, Lord, let this cup pass from me, the cup that you have given me to drink, which is bitter because I came to save them and they're not going to be saved. Is it possible that we don't have to do this? And then he said that the line after that was, but thy will, not mine, be done, which of course is a very famous Christian prayer, thy will, not mine, be done. Now, I believe that even the most exalted of these spiritual stories applies exactly to me and exactly to you, because these are truths that are operative everywhere. So this is how I've used that prayer in my own life. It serves us nothing to close our hearts to God, to Divine Mother. It serves us nothing to pretend to have a right attitude when we don't. I went through a cycle with Swami Kriyananda where I kept pretending to have a right attitude. He kept putting pressure on me to do this certain work that I didn't want to do, but I didn't know how to be honest with him. So I kept pretending to have a right attitude until I became so twisted up that we had to solve the problem. That was one of those points where I began to say, when he would say, Asha, how are you? I would say, I don't know, sir, how am I? And he would tell me. And on one of those occasions, he said, I'm worried about you. Well, I'm worried about myself. But he said, first of all, you never fooled me. You were pretending all this time, but I knew what you really felt. Now just even, again, bring this to your own life. Think about a friend of yours who's angry with you or upset about something or unhappy, and you say, is there something I can do to help you? I'm fine. You say to your child, is there a way that I can do something for you? I'm fine. How is there going to be any flow of energy? But somehow we're deeply afraid to be completely self-revealing, even in the privacy of our meditation room, partly because we ourselves don't want to admit it. But you have to understand that Divine Mother lives within us. Divine Mother is us. The Guru is in our own heart. I mean, imagine you're trying to hide your hand from your hand. Your hand right there, it knows what it is, and you're going to pretend that it isn't. I mean, that's about how practical this idea is. You never fooled me. Okay? So it's very important, both for our own psychological and spiritual well-being, to just admit what we are. We can't help it. We can be just furious. We can be having a temper tantrum. Our mother has locked us in a room and we don't like it. And she asks, are you done? And we say, not yet. It's just, this is how I feel. Lord, I don't like this. Can this cup pass away from me? Do I really have to do this? And it's fine to say, I wish we didn't. But then at the end, just like the child of a loving, wise mother, which is exactly what we are, we have to say, okay, but if you say so, we'll do it. But you have so much more power in that acceptance if you yourself know what you're dealing with. If you don't even know where you stand, then you can't solve the right problem. You'll start trying to solve the problem over here when the real problem is over here. I mean, this is called suppression in psychology, but it's much more interesting just spiritually speaking. Between you and God. Okay, Lord, this is what we're working with. I was in a very difficult situation with Swami Kriyananda once. He had asked of me something that was in my own best interest, but it was simply more than I could bring myself to accomplish. I just didn't have the detachment, the discipline, many different things I didn't have. But so I tried. I tried for a period of time, but I was just not able to meet the standard that he had set for me. And you can imagine, it's very important for me. But I also knew by this time that I had to be completely real and sincere. So with no complaint, I didn't say, "Why did you ask such a hard thing of me?" I just said, I'm not able to do it, just like that. I don't think Swami took another breath before he said, "Well, so much for theory, let's deal with reality." That's what he said. In theory, it seemed like a good idea, but if you can't do it, we're going to have to find another solution, aren't we? So we have to have that kind of faith that we can put ourselves completely in Divine Mother's hands. I don't think I can handle this. I think this is more than I can do. I really don't know what the answer is, but if this is what you're asking of me, then we have to find a way. And you may have to say, but you're going to have to sort it out because this is beyond me. I wrote a book, which is for sale out there, Loved and Protected, Stories of Miracles and Answered Prayers. There's one story in there of this woman who, she gave birth to like her third or fourth child. She had all these small children. Her husband then had a heart attack and he couldn't work anymore, whereas they'd been partners in all that they'd done. His entire contribution was now holding the new baby. She had to both, do her full-time job, and he was still trying to run his business, but it was difficult, and the house and the children and this and that. And she finally reached the absolute end. She said at church, and she just said to God, "I can't go on." The next day she was fired from her job, which that's what she wrote. On the face of it, just looked like, weren't you listening? But then she goes on to tell in this story how losing her job just sort of started one thing after another thing. And even though it was not easy, it was a solution she never would have imagined. Ever imagined. But it actually solved everything. She could take care of her own children. She could help her husband a lot more, on and on and on like that. Now, a few stories like that tell us at least that it's possible. That this is the beginning of how to love what you have to do anyway, which is that we get into the right relationship with the source of our life. And even if we don't love what we're doing, we love the fact that Divine Mother is always taking care of us. She often takes, Mother Teresa of Calcutta said, "God will never give you more to handle than you can handle." And then she said, "But sometimes I wish he didn't have so much faith in me." And that's exactly how we feel. Divine Mother, what makes you think I can rise to this? But if you think that I can, okay, let's go forward. Now, I'd like to just have us take a short break, maybe 10 minutes to breathe, and I don't know if there's water or tea or not, but just to breathe. And then we'll come back and I'll start from that point with questions if you have them, and then we'll see what we do for the next hour. Okay, let's take a break now. I was asked a couple of questions during the break, so I'm just going to go there. I was asked the question about how to be more accepting, which of course is what I've been talking about, but also how to be less judgmental of others. In other words, how to let go of the thought that people and things around you should be different than they are. And this is not an easy issue. And this is something that, and it gets very complicated because it has a lot to do, and this is a bit subtle, but I think it's worth trying to explain. It has a lot to do with how you work with yourself. I went through a very complicated psychological thing, which I don't want to burden you with, but of always thinking that I could be better than I was as a person, as an artist, everything, in every way, as a writer. And the only reason I wasn't as good as I could be is because I was a lazy bum and I wasn't working hard. And if I just kept scolding myself and criticizing myself and telling myself, how I was squandering my life, then sort of someday, just like popping out of the closet, would come this perfect version of myself. It would have been this great joke, and it would all be settled. And one day I realized that the person that I was, with all her limitations, her restless mind, her unkind, her sharp tongue, her undisciplined nature, everything that you want to make a list that I had was me. That was it. There really was no better version anywhere. This was it. And on one hand, that would be very awful. But on the other hand, actually, this enormous sense of relaxation set in. And I actually went through this, again, welcome to my mind, but I went through this whole process where I just accepted that I was only ever going to be kind of mediocre in this life. I was not going to be a saint. I was not going to be a star. Like all the ambitions I had for myself were way beyond my abilities. That this is who I was and this is the best I could do. And when I saw where it was going, I not only didn't resist, I embraced it completely. And I started thinking of myself as a total failure. No ambition would be realized, no desire would be realized. So then everything that happened after that was just extra. You know? It was like the worst had happened, and if I could salvage a tiny bit from the wreck, wouldn't that be great? I even went so far as to imagine my life review, meeting Master in the astral world and having to explain to him that, yeah, it was a promising life, but none of it really came to much. And then sort of point out the few things. I was nice to this person, and I was nice to that person, and I helped this one a little. My mantra, my personal mantra became, I'm a pretty nice person. I'm a pretty nice person. Now, first of all, that had an enormously integrating effect on me. Because one of the reasons we hide from Divine Mother is because we don't really want to accept that many people, if they can't be the best, at least try to be the worst. Because what we really don't want to be is just mediocre, which, welcome to the club. That's basically where we all are, you know? We're really not so bad and we're not so good. We're just muddling along as best we can. Now, it occurred to me when I began to see myself more realistically. Of course, there's a whole lot of other implications from this, which is now that my standards were not so impossible, I was actually able, I started working out the right karma. When we have false ideas of ourselves, we're always trying to work out somebody else's karma. I mean, we think it's ours, but it's really not the issue, because we have to come all the way back to where we're actually standing. Here's a fact about spiritual life, is that it grows from the inside. Everything about creation grows from the inside. Divine Mother, Satchidananda, manifests us from the inside. If you look at everything in creation, the sperm and the ovum, they actually unite even inside the mother's body, and the baby grows from there. We don't start from the outside. We don't have the baby and then fill it in like this. You don't have the apple tree, like the shape of it, and then fill it in. You have a seed. Every time I eat an apple, I'm so interested. There's that seed. Right somehow in there is the apple tree that's outside my kitchen window. It isn't fulfilled yet, but the only way to get that apple tree is from that seed. Now think about all that seed's going to have to go through, and it all puffs out from the inside, doesn't it? The little seed cracks, a little sprout comes, the little sprout goes through the ground, becomes a little twig, the twig thickens up into a trunk. And you can't get from a seed to an apple tree by any other method. And no amount of saying to the seed, become an apple tree, is going to make the seed. It just can't do it. No amount of saying to yourself, be a better person, is going to make you a better person. You have to stand right where you're standing, and there's going to be the place where you put your foot. And usually the place where you put your foot is so boring compared to where you're trying to go. You just have to put your foot there because there's no way to get there. I cannot get to the back of the room except by walking back there. And if I just become interested, this is how to love what you have to do anyway. Most people want to be back there. They don't want to walk the distance. And the reason we're not enjoying what's going on is because we have this completely ridiculous idea that I can get from here to there without walking. And we want to be there, but it requires, you have to raise yourself there. Your young people today, a lot of them want to be rich without doing any work. Want to be rich without doing any work. Yeah, I mean, this is like, I just want to be successful, and so I visualize myself successful. I don't visualize myself working, But it's the same with us. I want to be perfect, but I don't want to face the stages to get there. You had a question. What was the question?
This made me think of something. See, if I just visualize myself as a seed, and then if I'm using an affirmation,
right,
saying that I sprout faster, I sprout better, isn't that like telling the seed that yes, you can grow? So kind of instilling that hope into the seed.
Absolutely.
And also with Guru's grace, perhaps the dispersal of seeds happens to a better atmosphere where you're able to grow faster than others.
Yes.
Does that happen?
Yes, all of that is true. The more dynamic, the question is, can the seed be made to grow faster by Guru's grace and by affirming Guru's grace? Absolutely. This comes back to where I was saying, be completely open with Divine Mother, be completely at peace with the reality that you are, and then she can help you. And so yes, that's exactly right. Now coming to the place where I was, which was about judgment and judgmentalness, yes, Vijay?
See, it is the outward energy or inside joy that is more important.
Outward energy or inside joy?
Inside joy. Most big, even like Buddha left everything outside world and come. There is something inside,
Right.
which we can't explain. At least I can't explain.
Right. But
So
you see,
people go to that inside only mostly. Why?
very few of us have the karmic freedom to only live with the inside joy. Almost all of us have to also participate up completely in this world. It's just the karma that we have. But the only way to participate in the outward energy is with the inside joy. Because if you're participating from the inside joy, then everything is the joy. Even if it's very difficult, unpleasant, hard, painful, that doesn't mean we can't have the inside joy of knowing that Divine Mother is with us and Guru is guiding us. Because sometimes this is a very difficult period of my life. Sometimes really hard, even tragic, even horrible things happen, and they do. So we can't trust circumstances. We can only trust that God is with us in those circumstances. But then the inside joy is everything. Swamiji says, even in the deepest suffering, the presence of God is always deeper. And in a very strange way, you can have both things happening at the same time. You can be weeping in grief, and simultaneously feel underneath you is Master's love. So it can't be separated, the outer from the inner. And the more we act from that inner reality, the more everything happens for the best, because we have then the right magnetism. If we think, if only things would go better, then I would get joyful, the magnetism we're putting out is not positive. And so everything goes worse and worse. And this is what you were asking about. If we visualize that seed sprouting with Master's grace, then it will sprout better and more beautifully. Now, our relationship to the world around us and to other people is always a reflection of our attitude toward ourselves. Sometimes if we have a tendency to judge other people, sometimes we have to start by disciplining our external, some we have to start by disciplining our internal. But the more at peace we are with our own mixed bag of qualities, some are good, some are bad, I mean well, but I don't always succeed, our impatience with others is always a rebellion against the way the seed becomes a tree. And we look at other people and we want them to be trees when they're only seeds. And it's not helpful. It's not helpful for you because you're always in a state of judgmental impatience. And it's definitely not helpful for them. It's so annoying to have other people always wanting you to be different than you are. How does that help anyone? In our relationships with other people, we have to always ask the question, how will this help? How will this help me? How will it help them? I lived with Swami Kriyananda, who had an absolutely generous attitude toward everyone. He had only one interest, which is he wanted to help people to open their hearts spiritually and come closer to God and Guru. He had no need within himself for us to be different. He was completely content with his own reality, and when he looked at us, all he wanted was to help us to be happier. And because of that, of course, he was everybody's best friend. And when you start thinking that you just want people to be something that they're not, you have to stop and ask yourself, one, how do I feel when people treat me this way? And just to be practical, we suffer according to the suffering that we have imposed on others. And if we're walking around all the time criticizing all the people around us for not living up to the standard that we have set, well, just settle down because it's going to come back. And when it comes back, how does it feel? I have a particular friend she's so accepting of me. She's just so completely accepting of me. I am gifted with many friends, but this woman, because of her own nature, is outstanding in that respect. And I feel so completely at ease in her company. And it's not that she doesn't criticize me or doesn't know how I misbehave. Sometimes the things I do absolutely astonish her in their stupidity. She just cannot understand how I could be so misguided. Primarily, it was that she was always so sweet and I was often so critical. She just couldn't understand why I could be that way. So it wasn't a false relationship. But one day I really deeply thought, how wonderful it is to be loved like that. And it occurred to me, gee, I could give this to other people. This is really a gift worth giving. And I thought of how much I tried to make people be different and how much they didn't like that. And I thought to myself how much I don't like it when people try to make me different. And the other thing about it is, it doesn't work. That's the practical point. They don't become different because you tell them to be different. People become different when they feel loved, when they feel secure, when they feel that somebody really understands. I make a game of it now because, I have to give the dog a bone. I have to give my mind something to do. When I see somebody do something completely preposterous and utterly misguided and disastrous in its implications, which of course people do. You don't have to be stupid. Swami Kriyananda was so loving, and at the same time he could look at someone and he could just explain them just in one sentence exactly. So it wasn't that he didn't know. He just saw it for what it was, and then he said, how can I help? He never closed his heart for being able to see a person's limitations. It was just their limitations. Now what? But I play it like, what were they thinking? What is going on inside their reality? Because inside everyone's head, they always think that it's a good idea. I mean, look at yourself. One of my favorite expressions about myself now is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Because if it hadn't, I wouldn't have done it. In retrospect, what was I thinking? But it seemed like a good idea at the time. And you get a little humor going here. So somebody does something completely insane. Well, it must have seemed like a good idea to them, or else they wouldn't have done it. And then sometimes you can kind of stand inside their head. And from their perspective, given their particular strengths and weaknesses and what they're trying to accomplish, well, that was what it would look like. And not only are you more sympathetic, and it's karmic money in the bank, really, to be nice. But nice, intelligently nice. Not nice like, oh yeah, everybody's just wonderful, doing wonderful things. Lots of people are terrible and doing horrible things. It's just a fact. But it seemed like a good idea at the time to them. And it becomes entertaining to see if you can get into their reality. And you'll find if you soften up on others, you'll soften up on yourself. And criticism is the antithesis of creative work. So if you're always criticizing, when it's your turn to risk, you're criticizing before you can risk. And so you cut off your own accomplishments at the knees if you're always criticizing. Do you understand that? Because you put yourself out a little bit in the unknown, and if your habit is to tear everything apart, then nothing you do ever gets legs. It just can't. You have to believe in the possibility. There's one more piece of that, which is, and this isn't exactly judgmental or acceptance, but it's related to it. I have a lot of energy and a lot of willpower, and I used to try to fix everybody else's life to the extent that I could. I'd spend a lot of energy making it work for other people. But there was something always a little off about it. I mean, on one hand, it looked like I was, the great servant of the whole world. There's something a little off. And it came to a head when my parents, in the last years of my parents' life, when my mother became physically increasingly weak, and eventually my father's mind slipped a bit. And when they first began to decline, I was just running around fixing everything, like that. And strangely, they didn't appreciate it. And no real good seemed to come from it. And I had to go through this process, which became very important for me, which is I realized I was very much afraid of what was happening to them. I was really afraid of it. And I was also indirectly really afraid that they couldn't deal with it. Now, of course, an elderly person who doesn't have their strength, there's a lot of things they can't deal with, but that wasn't the level in which I was afraid. I was afraid just in themselves that they couldn't handle their own karma. And first I had to realize this is their karma. They were in their 80s. They'd spent 80 years of this incarnation and all the incarnations before, bringing them precisely to that spot. It wasn't foreign ground to them. It was the exact appropriate result of every decision they'd made. It was lined up exactly, and this is what needed to happen. So I realized suddenly that I'm not actually, or let's just say, I don't walk around being afraid of my own karma. I don't think, what might happen, what might happen, what might happen. And when something comes, I just think, well, we'll figure out a way to deal with it. If it's difficult, if it's easy, we'll figure it out. I have a certain confidence. But I had no confidence in my parents to deal with their own lives. And I realized I didn't have confidence in anybody to deal with their own lives. And I thought, this is a little bit arrogant, isn't it? That I alone can cope with my own karma, but nobody else on the planet can face what they have to face. You see how twisted we get? And I realized that a lot of judgment and lack of acceptance was just this false idea that I was the only one that God loves. Really. And so I also became more accepting of people when I realized this is just what they have to face. I don't have to protect them from it. I don't have to change them. I don't have to make them be different. It might be, and this is where I finally realized with my parents, it was inconvenient for them to be elderly. It was inconvenient for them not to organize their lives exactly as I wanted to organize them. But that was not love. That wasn't care. That was pure selfishness. I just wanted to organize their lives for my convenience. I mean, what is that? And so I tried to feel it from their point of view. And I would have done things very differently, but it wasn't their karma to do it differently. And I started cooperating with their flow. Instead of judging it and trying to shift it, I just started cooperating with it. And, well, for one thing, I was much more relaxed. Also, I didn't have nearly as much to do. And they liked me a lot more. You know, we were much happier at the end than we were when I was doing it differently. And I've taken that big lesson, and I look around all over the place. Oh, look, this is just how this person wants to do it. I have a friend. She was at that time. She was remarkably inefficient on the material plane. I'm very efficient. Like I could go into factories and organize them. And she was canning some fruit, and she had the hot pot of the jam on this side. She had the jar on this side, and she was actually crossing the kitchen with a spoon, like that. And of course, that was before I was nicer. I just flipped, you know. But she said to me rightly, I would have figured it out. Just like that. But that's actually been a little mantra for me. They'll figure it out. And when they figure it out, they'll know. I'll tell you one more story about letting people have their own way. People only learn by experience. We only learn by experience. One of the ways you accept what's happening is that people have to figure it out their own way. My husband is very good on the material plane. His car smells like a new car, like 6 years after he bought it. He just keeps things really well. And he would always tell me when we would travel, you know, I would have a tendency to set the suitcases on the hood of the car. Some of you have heard me tell this story on the tape, on the hood of the car. He would say, it'll scratch the hood of the car, don't do that. So he said that all the time. So whenever he was there, I would put the suitcases on the... Okay. I'm traveling by myself one day in his car. I have borrowed his car to drive up to visit our friends at Ananda Village. I have what appear to me to be soft-sided suitcases. And they're a little heavy, so I put it on the hood of the car. And because it was a little heavy, I couldn't lift it, so I dragged it off. Of course, it had little metal feet on the bottom, and it just did this fantastic scratch, just right down the front of his car, just fantastic. For me, it was like, oh, wow, look at that. If you put the suitcases on the hood of the car, they'll scratch the car. How many times did he tell me? We've been married 30 years. But I never believed him until I scratched the hood of the car. Fortunately, I was visiting a friend. I called the husband out. Would you please call David and tell him I scratched the hood of his car? You know? Because if you tell him, it'll be a joke. If I tell him, it won't be a joke. So he did. He called him. By the time I got home, David was laughing. And fortunately, Vidur, my friend, made it seem much worse. So when he actually saw the scratch, it really wasn't anything. You know, so we weathered it. But it was stunning to me that I didn't know that. And I didn't believe him. I mean, he's a very smart man. I have great respect for him. But I never knew until I experienced it. So why waste your energy telling someone your experience and imagining for a heartbeat that that's going to persuade them? They're just going to have, you're just going to have to lead them through. In Conversations with Yogananda, Master says, Swami writes, that Master tried to draw out of people their karma. Instead of solving it, he often tried to make it worse. And they tell this story about a student, someone who never really became a disciple, who thought Master was very vain. And Swami explains how Master, in front of the student, he was a driver for this lecture tour that Master was doing around the country. Before the lecture tours, Master would stand in front of the mirror and primp and really work on his hair, make his hair just so, work with his outfit, just because he knew this man thought that he was vain, and he just played into it. He said so that the attitude would come out of him and he would be able to see it. And very often in life actually draws the worst out of us. I was born into a family that in many ways exaggerated my worst qualities. I mean, it was a good family, and I'm not complaining about it, but there was a certain dynamic that caused me some of my worst faults to increase. And for a long time I thought, why did I do that? Why didn't I go somewhere where it would be balanced? But I realized they got bad enough that I noticed. You see? And they just got worse and worse and worse in my life, and then I saw, well, this is really not an attitude I want to have. And if it had been suppressed or not exacerbated, I would never have learned. So when you see people acting in ways that aren't good, you have to go with their karmic flow. You can't just impose on them your own. Because think about it, that's how Divine Mother treats you. And if you create a universe in which there's no compassion, when you need it, it won't be there. I was helping a friend once who was ill, staying up late with her, and she was thanking me, and I just jokingly said, "Money in the bank." I'm helping you today, you're going to help me tomorrow. Of course, that isn't why I was doing it, but that is why I was doing it. Let's operate divine law. Let's work with divine law. You don't like what's happening to you? Believe me, disliking it is not going to get you out of it. It doesn't work. In the end point, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it to be crabby and bitter and judgmental, because what you get for that is you get to be crabby and bitter and judgmental. Now, is that a prize worth having? Not likely.
But in case of mother taking care of children,
Uh-huh.
and in the process of their, she feels she's responsible for bringing them
Right.
up properly and make them a good human beings. Many things that come in your way, you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You can't be judgmental then, or you correct them. If you correct them, they feel bad, and you get nowhere.
And if you let them experience on their own, you just feel that
Then
you're
you
not doing
become
your
late
best.
also because
You're not doing your best.
I'm going to start by saying I never had children. And I haven't been an Indian mother for many incarnations, although I'm sure I have been. I think parenting is the most challenging. Parenting is a phenomenal sadhana. And there is no answer except, the answer to this question, I'm going to back up and I'll tell you the question. For many years in my life, because I was born in a Jewish family right after World War II, so the concept of I'm going to talk about concentration camps, like your own family, okay? But like, I used to have this worry. What if I was in a concentration camp? What if the guard, this sounds strange, but you'll see where I'm going. What if the guard starts brutalizing the person next to me? Is this a past life memory? I don't know what this is. Do I step in and sacrifice my life? Or do I just remain passive and let all of this happen around me? I worried about this a lot. And finally, at a certain point, I was able to ask Swami Kriyananda a question. Who else could I ask such a question? His answer to me was, you are asking if in the moment of crisis, how do you know what divine will is? He said, perhaps if by interfering, you might bring down suffering on everybody there. Maybe the only thing to do is to let it run its course because there'll be less harm. How can you evaluate that in the moment? That was my own fear, to sacrifice my life to try to save others. And his answer was, the only way you can know what divine will is in a moment of crisis is if you have practiced when it was easier. Practiced when it was easier. You have practiced all the time before the crisis came. Because you have to have that as part of your way of operating. I think for those of you who are raising children or whatever the challenging situation it is, you can't wait for the moment with your child. You have to be practicing all the time, trying to live by intuition, trying to discern between your desires and your fears and your true wisdom. You have to be asking God's grace on your life at all times so that when it is the most important moment, you have something to depend on. And then after that, even though the soul is your responsibility for now, think how many mothers and fathers every soul has had. You're here now, but the destiny of the being, as Swamiji put it, the mother and the father create the vehicle for the soul to have its destiny, but the mother and father do not create either the soul or its destiny. You simply make the vehicle through which it can express. That doesn't mean you have no responsibility, but the responsibility is primarily you developing the right consciousness, because that's what will, in the end, affect him. After that, I think the power of desperate prayer is something always to rely upon, because there's no way to know. Yeah.
How do you handle if your point of raising children is different and your thoughts are different and your husband thinks different? It's such a clash that children become disillusioned that who's right and who's wrong.
I think the answer is exactly the same. I think you have to be in constant communication with God and Guru. You have to be looking at everybody involved and in the moment be able to retreat to the spiritual eye and say, what do you want me to do? And let me give you another thing that I found very helpful when I'm dealing with a difficult situation with another person. We are expressing through our egos, but everybody has a superconscious aspect. We are all also infinite. And your little boy or your little girl, no matter how tiny they look, they're on a divine trajectory, and their soul is infinite. And their soul is guiding that reality. I found that if I pray to the person I'm trying to help, I don't merely pray for that person, I actually pray to that person. I'm sitting there looking right at someone, child or adult, and I don't know what to do. And I just quietly, with my attention at the spiritual eye, I address the soul of the person. What do you want from me? How can I help you? What are you trying to accomplish? And I'm not asking their ego, I'm asking their soul. Where are you trying to go, and how can I help you go where you really need to go? And I tell you, I've had astonishing responses to that. I mean, such as, for example, I have in my mind, I really want to say this particular thing, but I'm not certain, so I pray and I ask, does your soul want to hear this? And the thought will disappear from my mind. And, like a week later, I'll remember, oh, I was about to say that. Or suddenly, words come out of your mouth that you never imagined, or words come out of their mouth that you never imagined. And it's not only the communication, it's also bringing yourself back to an understanding of what's really going on here, which is we are two souls who happen to be next to each other, father, daughter, mother, son, husband, wife. We're next to each other. Where are we trying to go? How can I help you go where you are trying to go rather than make you go where I think you should go? This gets very confusing between parents and children because of all the elements involved, but never forget what you really work with. And if your intentions are sincere, your intentions are much more important than anything else. And any circumstance a child faces, it's their karma. Compared to how many times people have sexual intercourse and how many times a child is conceived, it's because the child is part of the equation. He knows, it knows that this is the circumstance it wants, and it's not shocked. You may be shocked, but it's not shocked. It wouldn't be there if this wasn't what it needed. So again, an exaggerated sense of responsibility for creating ideal circumstances does not take into account somebody else's reality. And you might not like it, but you're going to be more effective by modeling faith in the divine plan, faith in that person's ability to deal with their karma, faith that everything is happening as it needs to happen. Doesn't mean it's good, but just as it needs to happen. It can't be otherwise. And you can still grieve. You have many levels. You can still cry your eyes out to Master and wish it were different, but thy will, not mine, be done. And then simply pray. Well, this is how I prayed for my parents when they were going through all of that, and it was so difficult. I said, Divine Mother, I don't know what you're trying to teach these people, but you really need to get on with it. It was very forceful because it was very difficult for me. And I said, you have to, and this is what I prayed, you have to give them the receptivity and the wisdom to learn whatever it is you're trying to teach them. And that's what I did with all my agitated energy. I started telling Divine Mother, Master says we can do that. Help these people. Look at them. I can't help them. You have to help them. And it worked, really. Just somehow it all worked. And I stopped attacking them. I just went up to Divine Mother and remained. Because I was honest. I was telling Divine Mother what I thought of it, but then I was using my force. That was the right prayer. Help them. You've got to help them because I sure can't. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what's going on here. It all seems so wacky to me. And then I just kind of, that prayer itself, you begin to kind of feel you're not alone in this. And then you just develop this cheerful, impassive face with all this desperate prayer going on inside of it.
Is that energy moved in the right direction?
Yeah, energy up to God, and then God takes care of it. Yeah.
That thing you have to pray daily then.
You have to practice all the time. No, not daily, minute by minute. But remember, almost 2 hours ago, I said this wasn't going to be just a snap, did I? But this is the seed becoming the apple tree. And the question was also asked at the break, how to meditate deeply.
Yeah.
By not giving up. But meditation is everything. Meditation is not just when you're sitting on that chair not moving. It's how you're thinking about everything, how you're dealing with everything. So the way to meditate deeply is to be thinking in terms of Divine Mother's role in your life all the time. And then when you finally come to sit to meditate, there'll be less agitation. You'll already be in that reality. And the answer to that is exactly the same. How does the seed become an apple tree? How do I get from there to the back of the room? I've been on the spiritual path. I was given Vivekananda's book in 1967. I met Swami Kriyananda in 1969. That's a long time ago now. There's history books written about this. I was telling, I met Swami before many of you were born. This is so hard for me to comprehend because time is such a joke when you live through it a little bit. But I spend all my time talking about the spiritual path. Fortunately, that's what I get to do. I still really don't know how any of it works. The only thing I've noticed is don't quit. If you just don't quit, we think it's very neat and tidy. I can meditate like this. When I first started meditating, I thought 3-4 years and I'll have this down. Master used the phrase, You have within you a portable paradise. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? And so a portable paradise. Portable means it's wherever you are and it's paradise. So I remember when I was like 19 or when I first heard this, portable paradise. And I pictured that wherever I went, I would just, go into this divine state. It didn't work that way exactly, but I just didn't quit. And I don't exactly know what happens, but if you don't quit, you just become somebody else. You become a completely other person. I even, in the early years, when I first moved to Ananda, my hair was long and I wore it in little braids and I had glasses and I just had a certain way of looking. 6 or 7 years later, my hair was short and I had different glasses or contact lenses. My name, Asha's the name Swami gave me, so my name had changed. And I went with Swamiji to New York City, and we were staying in the apartment of this young couple who had visited our community when I was in charge of the kitchen, cooking. And they had spent like 2 or 3 weeks there, often in the kitchen, helping me washing dishes, so I knew them very well. When we arrived there, and Swami introduced me, I said, "Oh, we met because we used to work together." "No," they said, "that wasn't you." I said, "Yes, it was. We were there together, I this and that." "No," they said, "that wasn't you." I let them say it 3 times before I said, "You're right, that wasn't me." If they were going to tell me I'd changed so much they were certain, why would I say no? And that's just how it works. Divine grace, everything is divine grace in the end. And I don't know how it works. We just put forth every effort we can. We suffer, we struggle, we fail, we persevere, we fight, we this, we that, and in the end, divine grace changes you. And I don't think it would if you didn't do that. But what I feel like is that divine grace is going to change you, and we just entertain ourselves by running in circles for a while, and then divine grace falls on us. And then we run in circles, and then it falls on us. But it really does. I mean, you just become somebody else without having to reincarnate. And even Krishna says it, even a little practice of this inward religion will free you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And it's true. It's really true. Just take one tiny idea and just practice it. Master said we have to do 1/100th of what he taught. To realize God, that's what he said. So don't worry about what you can't do. Don't even give a second thought to what you can't do. If your meditations are restless, your meditations are restless. Someday they won't be. But just whatever you can do, restless meditations, deep meditations, kindness, whatever it is, just do it and don't quit. And inch by inch, you'll find yourself at the back of the room. Suddenly you'll say, "Whoa, look, there's an apple. Where did that come from?" The fruits of your divine life. Well, we've reached the end of our time.
Many people, they practice daily, they don't quit, but their level remains the same. Where they started, they remain the same.
But you don't necessarily know that. They may have been in a deep hole when they started and they've only now gotten to the surface. It's very hard to tell.
Yeah, but they declare themselves, "Look, I am not improved."
But you don't know.
Maybe they've also not realized what they've got.
Yes, you don't know.
They've not gone deep into it.
Well,
They have not gone deep into it.
yes, exactly.
I read somewhere Anandaji had written, unless you have that burning desire and better, you remain there only. You don't progress.
Well, Patanjali says the path is long or short depending on the intensity of your effort.
Intensity of
Yes, so of course, the more effort you put out, the greater the result. There's no... It's metaphysics. It's energy. This is an energy universe. It's not God has favorites. It's the energy you put forth creates magnetism, results come. If you hope to get a great deal without giving, you don't. But you get a little, if you give a little, and that's not nothing. That's not nothing. Maybe just the little tiniest thing is enough experience, and next time you'll try harder, you know. All right. I feel like that's the whole story. And we have the big clock in the back tells us that we're at our time. I, however, am in no hurry, so I will declare an official end. So those of you who have to leave may. And if you have further questions, I'm happy to stay and answer them. So thank you all. God bless you.